Dr. Stephanie, long time.
Long time. I'm happy that we're here.
I think we established this in the pre-call, but I think it was 2016 that we saw each other last.
It's that's too long.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Put you on the spot in front of people.
Yeah, sure.
There are millions of listeners. Do you remember where we met?
Where we met? Well, you were certainly my patient.
TikTok.
No, I don't remember the first
Diesel.
time we met.
Diesel
Oh
Fitness.
my gosh, Diesel Fitness.
Do you remember that?
Yes,
It was such a great gym. I loved it.
Same.
And it was actually one of the, that's the first gym that I joined when I came to Toronto. I was living in Northern Ontario, moved down after moving from the East Coast, and joined fitness, Diesel.
And I had my 9x9
You were
off.
a chiropractor there. And
100 square foot office.
And I was in banged up shape.
Yeah.
It's a long time ago.
Awesome. Wow.
So things have changed for you, right?
Yeah.
I was looking here, like the Estima Diet, the Better
Podcast?
the Better podcast, Betty.
The Betty Body.
The Betty Body. Lots are going on.
Yeah.
Switch over to entrepreneurship. Well, you've always been an entrepreneur, but you're taken to a different level now. Tell me about that journey.
Yeah, sure. Well, as you mentioned, graduated from the chiropractic college here in Toronto, started a practice where I met you. I actually remember when I graduated, speaking to a couple of other chiropractors thinking about joining their practice and realizing very early on that I was unemployable. So could not work for other people. I had to sort of do it on my own terms and opened up that small little shop in the gym. And so certainly being a chiropractor, running your own practice, as you mentioned, is a form of entrepreneurship. You are the HR person, the marketing person, the salesperson, the technician, payroll, all the things, accounting.
It's called a startup.
Yeah, I called a startup, exactly. And did that for many years. I was in private practice for 16 years. So from Diesel Fitness, and I'm sure I'm trying to think of some of the names that were there. I remember George was there.
George Chalker.
Yeah, George was there.
DJ George.
Yeah, DJ George. Yeah, spinning and DJing at the same time. So moved from there and actually stayed in that area. So in downtown Toronto, moved on from that gym, opened up my own space near the Thompson Hotel. I don't think it's the Thompson anymore, but...
no, it's switched. I forget the name of it now.
Yeah, so in a hotel, and then we had... there was an unfortunate fire that happened there, and then I had to move on. Again, in the same sort of area in downtown Toronto. And over the course of my, we'll say, tenure as a chiropractor, was very successful, loved my patients, felt like I was doing a lot of good in the community, but also felt like there was something that was still missing for me. So didn't feel like I was tapping into all of my talents. So certainly as a chiropractor, many people seek you out for neck pain, back pain. You know, you came to see me because, you were like banged up, to use your words. Also wanted to dive into nutrition, also wanted to dive into stress management and mindset. These are things that all in aggregate add to someone's health, right? And the expression and the experience that they have. So started running a nutrition program in the clinic, was very successful, started running that online as well, and then was able to, with some of the the income from online at some point had surpassed the clinic income. And that was sort of the hedge that I'm a pretty conservative entrepreneur, you might say. So I wanted to make sure that I was able to at least replace the income in the online space before really deciding to close the clinic. So closed the clinic in April 2019. And then from there, continued with the online program, started a podcast, as you mentioned, and then also wrote a book in 21. Yeah. So these are all, and all of these things. So the Better podcast explores how you can have better metabolism, better body composition, better hormones if you're a woman or a man, better relationships, better sex, all the things. And then the Betty Body is for women, again, talking about hormones and how we should be living in alignment with our cycle, which is not something that's typically, I wasn't taught it in school. I mean, we certainly learned about the menstrual cycle maybe for an hour or two, but really didn't explore how that that impacts mood, it impacts decision making, it impacts energy, mitochondrial function, all the things. So the book is sort of the answer to that.
So tell me, like, I was watching your video on the Betty Body, your promo video, and you really got personal in that video about the transition you were going through at the time and the direction you want to take. And I know in our pre-call we talked about, in the clinic, seeing patients like myself, you're able to reach a certain population, but you had more you wanted to do. You had a bit of a mission of a messaging that you want to get out and express what you went through as a woman. Dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I touched on it a little bit. So when the clinic, with the original fire happened at the same time. So my clinic burned down, and then in the same month, my marriage essentially at the time was ending. So I had sort of these two really big life events coincide, and my health, will say, and I would even say prior to that. So those are two really big things. They happen to happen at the same time. The old adage, like when it rains, it pours. Certainly that was there. But even prior to those events, I had always struggled with my menstrual cycle. So it was always very much, leading up to bleed week, let's say, I was very moody. I felt inflamed, lots of water retention, didn't have the same energy, not the same focus, not the same drive that I would have, let's say, in my follicular phase. So for anyone that's listening, the follicular phase is the first 2 weeks of the cycle. So that's bleed week, and then the week before you ovulate. Ovulation is the middle of the cycle. That's when we release an egg for fertilization. Whether or not you want to have a baby, that's just what happens. And then we have the luteal phase, which is the second half of the cycle. And that second half of the cycle is where a lot of women struggle because of the different change. Like we have this sort of different hormonal milieu. So the energy, sleep, moodiness, affect, all of those things can change. And then if there's any type of hormonal imbalance, those changes in energy and sleep and affect can be accentuated. And I remember going to my own medical doctor, and the answer was just like, here's a pill just for pain management. And there wasn't any dive into, well, let's actually look at your hormones. Let's actually test your estrogen levels relative to your progesterone levels. Let's look at your testosterone levels and see sort of the symphony of hormones and how they're talking and the relationship to each other. I talk about this in the book as well. But for me, I was what's called estrogen dominant in the second half of the menstrual phase. So when we think about sort of yin and yang, like progesterone needs to be a little higher than estrogen in the second half of the cycle in order for a woman to sort of feel calm and happy, to have good sleep. And for many women who experience PMS, so things like the water retention that I mentioned, the moodiness, tender breasts, all those things, that can be more of a sign of estrogen dominance. And that wasn't ever really addressed for me. So I always felt like my menstrual cycle was this curse. Like I always felt like it was this really difficult time of the month.
Something to live with.
Yeah, something that I had to live with just by way of my, chromosomal sex, right? And then started, when I had sort of these two big life events, my health really deteriorated, as you might imagine. There's quite a bit of stress that happens when your career, I had to sort of scramble to find a place to continue seeing patients. I had 2 young children at the time. I was going through like a change in my family. So I wasn't sleeping. I was having trouble concentrating. I remember there was actually one day in sort of my makeshift clinic, I squared the corner of the doorway that I was trying to walk through because I was so distracted with something. I had just received, a text, like a really emotionally charged text, and just squared walked right into it with my forehead. I just had this big welt, and my assistant was like, you know what? I think we're just going to cancel your patients for the day. You just need to go home and just chill out.
Cope.
Yeah. So kind of getting back to your question, through my own experimentation with nutrition, working with some of the patients in the clinic around manipulating variables like nutrition around their menstrual cycles, I was able to formulate a body of work that's now, the Estima method or the Estima protocol, where we change the way that a woman eats based on where she is in her cycle. I also talk about changing the way that you train based on the hormonal composition, like where you are in your cycle. And now I'm in my 40s, so I'm in perimenopause. So now I'm also incorporating a lot of perimenopausal strategies for women as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
That might have been TMI.
I think the
apologize.
no, it is what it is, right? Like you said, it's not information that's readily available for people.
Well,
right?
people don't talk about it because females just in medicine in general have always been looked at as sort of smaller archetypes of men, right? So I think that it's just like, oh, and I talk about this in the book, I've talked about this in lecture series as well, even just as a very simple example. If I were to ask you what are some of the signs and symptoms of a heart attack, you might say pain down the left side of the arm, stabbing, shooting pain. And that's very true if you're male, right? For a woman, it's not often the left-sided shooting pain down the arm. She often has a really bad headache or indigestion or like flu-like symptoms.
And they don't complain.
And they don't, but it's not that sort of prototypical like stabbing, sharp pain down the left side of the arm. So there's been so many women who have, let's say, presented to an emergency room, being in the process of having a myocardial infarct, having a heart attack, and being turned away because the signs and symptoms weren't ever recognized, right? So I think that more and more I'm starting to see, and maybe it's because I'm sort of entrenched in the literature and entrenched in, seeing my colleagues put out more and more information. We're seeing that change, but I would say generally, if you walk into, even as a 45 or 48-year-old woman, if you walk into your medical doctor's office saying, hey, I'm having some heart palpitations. Oprah, I think she recently released this video that went viral. And she's like, I was 48, I was having all these heart palpitations, and my female doctor, gave me an angiogram and then put me on heart medication. And it's like, if Oprah's doctor, arguably...
She'll get the best care.
Yeah, she's going to get the best care, best access to resources. Her female doctor missed that the cluster of symptoms that she was experiencing was part of perimenopause. Like, what chance in hell did all the rest of us have, right?
Yeah.
So it's just really about educating women in terms of how are we different, how are we unique, and how does that change over the arc of your life, hormonally, metabolically, physically, and then how can we advocate for ourselves?
So where did you start? So you're shutting down the health loft at the time.
Yeah.
You're going through this personal experience after the incidents that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Where did you start? You obviously had a light bulb come on that you had a business here and you wanted to reach a broader audience.
Yeah.
What was your start? Where did you focus on first?
It was first, the nutrition program was first. So I was running that in the clinic. And then I was like, so I had said before, I really felt like I was called to serve more people and not necessarily be limited to my geography. And we were talking about this before. So I was in downtown Toronto, obviously the financial district. We had all the cool cats in King West, like coming to the clinic like you. And then, I had people kind of driving from out of town and stuff, but it's still very local, right? So even if you extend it out to the province, I'm still only reaching one province in one country.
And you can only see so many patients in a day.
Exactly.
Right?
And you can only, and there's a limit. You reach a ceiling in terms of trading your time. Like, your time is also a finite resource, right? So I wanted to reach more people, and I wanted to get away from the idea of sort of trading time for money, to sort of leverage my expertise to be able to reach more people wherever. So it started with the nutrition program. So we were running it in-house, and then I changed that into an online clinic. And I think I was also telling this to you as well. Like, after I closed the clinic, there was a grieving period for me. I didn't do a lot. I closed it in April, and then over the course of the summer, I had patient transfer files and some of the admin work that happens when you transfer a patient. But most of it was it was a slow and kind of ugly summer, we'll say, because it was very, it was a grieving process for me, because I had been, a doctor in the community for however many years, from diesel all the way to, 2019. And I had to sort of redefine who I was. If I wasn't this community leader where people would come and give me all of this positive feedback all the time, you've helped me, you've saved my back, you've saved my marriage, you help fix a man or a woman's pelvis, and all of a sudden they have a better sex life, right? So I had to really shed that call it identity, and then build a new one. So I had always wanted to start a podcast. That was something that I had always dreamed about. I always thought that there was, and I still think that it's true, that there are a lot of really big male podcasters in the science realm, and otherwise, but in the science realm in particular, there's a lot of big names in podcasting, and rightly so. They are, deservedly have all the sort of followers and applause, if you will, that is theirs. But I don't see a lot of women reach the same height, and I think that there's a lot of us who can speak the science, can understand the science, and then more importantly, translate it for the layperson. Because sometimes medical terminology can be a language unto itself. So being able to translate what I like to call like doctorese, right? All these fancy words into, okay, what does that mean for me right now? I don't see a lot of women in podcasting reaching the same level of success as many of our kind of male counterparts do. So,
or addressing the female issues,
or addressing
differences,
the female issues. Yeah, and there's a couple of men who I have looked up to for many, many years and have since become friendly with them. One of them, for example, is Dominic D'Agostino. So he's sort of a pioneer in ketogenic research. And when he first started, he would do very much a kind of classic ketogenic style diet, which is more of like a 4-to-1, or even what I advocate for if you're thinking of starting a ketogenic diet is more of a 70-20-10, which is 70% fat, 20% protein, and then 10% carbs.
And sorry to interrupt you, but does that differ male versus female, or are you?
Well, yeah. So one of the things that's really interesting is when I had him on the show, he was saying, it's really interesting. I noticed that women don't actually respond to the ketogenic diet long-term in the same way that men do, which has also been my observation. So in that nutrition pilot that I had in the clinic that I translated into an online program, also noticed that men would lose a lot of weight. They would really change their body composition quite drastically on that 70-20-10. And women could do it for a period of time. And it was almost like their thyroid just was like, this is not, after a certain amount of time, they stopped losing weight. And I would say it even started to reverse, where they would start to
not just a
gain
plateau,
weight.
They were gaining it back.
Yeah, they would start to gain weight doing the same thing. And certainly, when I was talking to Dom, he was saying, I think that it has to do with like the protein content. So he's often observed, which has been very similar to my observation, that around a 40% protein content or composition, we'll say, of the diet for women is actually much more appropriate long-term than protein restriction. So first, I was so happy to hear that we had sort of the same observations there, but it was one of the first times that I had heard sort of one of the bigger men in the space acknowledge that there's something different about female physiology and our need for protein, let's say, and even carbohydrates. Our need for carbohydrates is also a little bit higher too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if I answered your question there, but
I think you did.
Yeah.
So as far as the podcast goes, you've been on the air for how many years now?
I started it in 2019. So it took the summer off, as I mentioned. So closed the clinic in April, and then we started in October 2019.
And how many episodes?
We're at 300 and I don't know the exact number, 310, I think, maybe.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
And you've had some incredible guests. What has that been like? You don't start getting guests like yourself on a podcast right away. What was the challenge there for you to ramp up an audience, but obviously bring in the guests as well, because that's the content, right?
Yeah. So I originally reached out to my network. So I had already had some colleagues that were, quite well known, let's say, and we had them on the show. So maybe the first 10 to 15 episodes of the podcast, if you go in and sort of look, you'll see that these are people from my immediate network. And the way that I have differentiated myself, even from other female podcasters, is just it's very obvious, I think. And this is, I'm not trying to, I'll just say what I'm thinking. I work really hard in the prep. So I was saying to you, I had a cancellation today, which we've already rescheduled, but I spend days prepping for a conversation. And before I have someone on the show, I have easily 20 to, in some cases, 80 pages of notes from either their book, from research that I've pulled myself, from studies that I've read, that I want to pull into the conversation. And I think that that translates into a better conversation rather than just talking about everything that they've, you've listened to one guest on one show and they sort of have their talking points and they say the same thing on every single podcast. So I will listen and I try to figure out what those talking points are and then avoid them because I want to.
It's very evident. I was thinking about that. So obviously my research for you coming on today was listening to your podcast. I'll tell you a funny story. Last night, my wife and I are laying in bed and last minute prep, and she's watching a show on Crave or something on her phone. I'm on my phone, and the caption says something about menstruating on the top, and she looks over at me. She's like, "Something you want to tell me?"
Yeah.
She's like, "Is Aunt Flo coming to town?" But sorry, I just went blank there where I was heading with that.
But prep for the podcast.
Well, your podcast, it's evident that you're prepped. Like your podcasts are like you're bringing very knowledgeable guests on, but you're really diving in deep, and it's a two-way street on the conversation. So yeah, it's very evident.
Yeah, thank you. So that was sort of the marketing strategy. It was like, I'm just going to be the best. I'm just going to be the best interviewer. I'm just going to know the stuff better than other people, and that's going to be my USP. That's going to be my unique sales proposition. Is I know the stuff. I can have wicked conversations, and we're going to provide amazing value for our listeners. That's
a great segue because into my next comment or question. You and I had a great conversation the other day, and one of the things that I loved and I really identified with was when you went through what you went through emotionally in your personal life and with your business and the fire and all that, everything that happened, and you get all this off the ground and launch yourself and reinvent it yourself. They call it Dr. Stephanie's evolution, but it's more of a revolution, right? You talked about you always bet on yourself.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. I think that is, well, I'll say, I think to be an entrepreneur in general, I think you have to be a certain kind of crazy. I think there's a certain, you're just the salmon, you're just like, you want to swim upstream, you don't want to go with the flow. And I would even say that even in the, if you're going to be a successful chiropractor, there are many people who graduate from chiropractic college who don't run successful practices, right? There are many health coaches who become accredited but don't run successful coaching. And I think that if you are going to be a successful entrepreneur, I think that there's a certain type of person, there's a sort of prototype that I think about, which is maybe someone, I can tell you from my childhood, was bullied quite a bit. So certainly there's some trauma there that I continue to unravel with my coaches and therapists. But I think that there's a certain drive that successful entrepreneurs have that are different, let's say, than the masses. And one of the things that we were talking about is, so I closed the clinic, and it was a very difficult process for me to do because I had been doing it at the time for 16, maybe around 16 years.
So connected.
Yeah, so it was so connected to my ego, my identity. Who am I? I'm the chiropractor of the King West community in downtown Toronto. I've served tens of thousands of patients. And so that was really, it was integral to who I viewed myself as in the world. And I had no idea whether or not my online diet program was going to be successful, my podcast was going to be successful, that anybody would ever care to read my book. And the thing that I had said to you in the pre-call is I had, and even with the divorce, truly, and I'll also just preframe this by saying I have a great relationship with him now, and we've worked really hard on it. But at the time, I don't care if you're Gwyneth Paltrow, like it's difficult to get divorced, and you add kids on top. It was heartbreaking. It was very difficult. But I knew that I was choosing myself. I had no idea how I was going to be successful. I had no idea how I was going to get there, but I knew that I will always bet on myself and win. I know that I will fall off and somehow I'm like a cat. I'll land with my feet on the ground somehow. I don't know how it'll happen, but I'll figure it out.
That's great. I love to hear that.
Yeah.
So you have all these different things going on, right? You have the podcast, you're writing, you're coaching, you're speaking. Yeah. Tell me break that down for me. Like as far as time focus, like how do you manage all that? And number two, what do those revenue streams look like?
Sure. Yeah. So podcast, I typically record 1 day a week or 2, which is usually Tuesday. And then maybe I usually save Fridays for kind of a lighter day or an extra interview if I can. And so the podcast in the beginning made absolutely no money. It was actually, I would say, cost quite a bit of money to produce. I mean, you have mics and cameras and you have to do the audio, the AV and everything afterwards. But I really wanted proof of concept. I didn't want to take any advertising money, any affiliate money, anything like that until I could demonstrate that this was a podcast worth listening to, that it had legs. So we went maybe 2 years actually without any, it was just cost that I incurred in order to get the podcast up and running. Now we have affiliate relationships. So this is more of an American type of model where I have a large American audience. I have about 63-ish% of my audience is American, 20 to 25 is Canadian, and then the fill is the Commonwealth. It's
That's great because now you're hitting your goal, which was
Yeah.
the not being so pigeonholed to a geographical
Everywhere.
location, right?
Yeah. So I have my Aussies, New Zealand, and I have some English speaking, some European countries and so forth. And we actually do really well in Bhutan. It's like the happy country. So I'm always like number 2 or 3 in Bhutan. Anyway, so we have an affiliate model. So there's American products, let's say. And if you hear on the podcast, like, if I have a greens product, let's say, and I say, here, go to this link and use code Dr. Stephanie, right? So that's an affiliate kind of model where I get a small kickback from anybody who uses that code, I sort of make a kickback.
Right.
So there's a couple of products that I love and that I use myself that we have affiliate relationships with. We also have sponsorships. So, an example that we've had in the past is companies that show up to your door. They can take your blood work. They can look at your hormones. They can look at your, let's say, cortisol levels, testosterone levels, thyroid levels, do a full blood panel. And it's all online. So the thing I love about that, particularly as a Canadian, but also as an American, is that you can sort of bypass the gatekeepers. Like if you go, a lot of times I actually hear this from women all the time who suspect that they have a thyroid issue, and they'll go to their medical doctor and say, I've listened to a couple of podcasts on Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and I think I might have some, issues with my thyroid. Can we run some tests?
Cue the eye roll.
Yeah, right. They'll eye roll, or they'll only test 1 or 2 markers. They won't run a full thyroid panel, which you can't make an informed call on what's happening with the thyroid if you just look at, for example, thyroid stimulating hormone. I won't bore you with the details, but if you just look at 2 markers of the thyroid rather than the 7 that are there, you're not getting the full picture, right? So if your doctor doesn't agree with or doesn't know how to interpret those labs, he or she might be like, you don't need those. All we need are these 2 things over here. So they sort of gaslight you in a way. So there's these companies that have popped up, again, that entrepreneurial spirit that sort of bypass those gatekeepers where you can pay. It's out of pocket. So I know Canadians hate that, but you pay for it. You either pay for it in your taxes or you pay for it, up front. So, you sort of choose where the payment comes from. You can pay these companies directly. They come to your house, they blood draw, all the things, and you have an online printout of your labs, and then you can make an informed decision about and you can have a conversation with your doctor, or you change doctors or whatever. So those types of companies, for example, have spent 10, 20,000, for sponsorship on the show, for for us to talk about the products. And again, my modus operandi for allowing any advertisements is that I have to use the product myself and absolutely love it. Yeah. So we have sponsorships, affiliates for the pod. I also do coaching, as you mentioned. So many, I've mentioned chiropractors, health coaches, naturopaths, anyone who's not sort of a medical doctor, and even medical doctors who are looking to expand their practice. A lot of us don't have that entrepreneurial savvy. And even when I started, I had no clue what I was doing. Like I had this much clue, like 0 clue. So I had to sort of learn. And so I'm trying to shorten that learning curve.
That's 95% of entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like I had no idea, but I was going to figure it out. And it was super scrappy. Like I figured it out in a super scrappy way and over a longer delta. So what I'm trying to do with other doctors, other practitioners, other health coaches has kind of shortened their learning time. So we coach them on, what I like to call sales and marketing with integrity, and certainly the female-centric protocols that we've kind of lightly been discussing. A lot of people, you take these sort of advanced degrees and you learn about the menstrual cycle for, maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 hours. And it's actually a very complicated, intricate dance. There's a lot of different systems that come into play with a woman's reproductive cycle. So I go through all of that science, teach them how to develop protocols for women for a variety of different hormonal kind of conditions. So there's coaching, which is a revenue generator. People pay for those courses. And then speaking, as you mentioned, we have speaker fees, where people will pay me to come out and speak and talk on a variety of topics. So I go to corporations and I talk about how we can up-level productivity. Since you've known me for a long time, I've always had a fascination and a love of brain metabolism and neuroscience. So we talk a lot about, in the corporate world at least, how we can up-level productivity and how we can hack I don't like the word hack, but hack our hormones for, let's say, improving testosterone, improving dopamine, right, in the corporate setting. Because when we think about dopamine, this is a neurotransmitter that's involved in winning. It's involved in the hunt, let's say. So how can we get more of that sort of hunger to achieve and to do more and be more? So I talk on, I'm a speaker, and then I have revenue that still comes in from the book as well.
That's great.
Yeah.
And what's your breakdown? Like, what takes up most of your time right now? What's your
I would say
between coaching and the podcast?
Yeah, those are the big ones. I would say, I was just saying to you, I think before we started recording, or maybe we were already recording, but the podcast prep takes up a lot of time because I am so dedicated to myself being a learner and an eternal student. So I want to learn whoever's coming on, I want to know their body of work probably better than they do by the time that they come on the show. Yeah. So that's a core value of mine, is learning. I'm a student for life. So that takes up time. And then the course design and supporting my clients, my coaching clients, let's say my practitioners, that takes up probably an equivalent amount of time in my week. So those are sort of the two big, we'll say, time, commitments that I have in a week. And then the speaking is more one-off. It's, an afternoon, or, it's not every week that I'm speaking.
So, we've established very well that most of your focus is very on female health and wellness. Yeah. And my focus on entrepreneurship and leadership for these discussions. Talk to me about being a woman in business and what the effect is there.
Sure. Yeah. This is going to be for
this is a very broad question that we could be here for days on. But,
yeah, totally. Well, I would say that generally the corporate structure has been set up based on a male's cycle. And I say that having a male partner, I have 3 sons, I love men. So I just want to make sure that this is not construed as this down with the patriarchy garbage. That's not what I'm talking about. We love men. But the corporate sort of world is very much set up on this circadian kind of 24-hour clock. So I always like to say, men are like the sun, women are like the moon. So the sun rises, pretty much at the same time and sets at the same time. And we have the same kind of, men are very much like the sun, where you will cycle through testosterone and estrogen in a very predictable way every single day. And women are not like that. Women go, instead of cycling through those hormones in a 24-hour period, women will cycle through those hormones in a 29.5-day period. So they sort of mimic the moon, right? That lunar cycle. And so there are times of the month for a woman where she does feel like the huntress, she does feel extroverted and chatty and she's aggressive and she can take risks, but there's other times of the cycle where she's not. So I think it's important, if we sort of think about corporate culture, it's we get to work really early and the early bird gets the worm, and we have all of these early meetings, and then maybe you meet someone for lunch and then you go for the 5 to 7, drinks or happy hour or what have you. And then you go home at the end of the day. this is really set up to kind of mimic the flow of testosterone and estrogen in a man's circadian cycle. So testosterone for men highest at the beginning of the day and sort of has this slow slide, kind of, slowly lowers over the course of the day. And estrogen sort of has the opposite effect. So estrogen lower in the day and kind of rises towards the end of the day, which is why men tend to be chattier in the afternoon and evening versus in the morning. So actually my partner, Giovanni, how I've sort of set up his day is he doesn't talk to anyone before 12. Like he's in his office. He takes no calls. He does no emails. He just does. That's his strategy. That's his like deep thinking time. Right. And I'm trying to set that up for him in honoring his sort of hormonal profile. Right. For me,
it's interesting because we're so, as society it goes and as the workplace goes, we're just so in that 9 to 5 mode all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
And for women, that's not necessarily the case. We're not necessarily, all of our deep thinking happens in the morning every single day. There's going to be some times where we are feeling very extroverted. We are, that sort of, and that would correspond for the women who are like, yeah, I feel like that sometimes. It's that week before you ovulate. So week 2 of the cycle approximately is where we see that rise in testosterone for women. And then after she ovulates, the testosterone kind of drops. So she's a bit more introverted. She's a little bit more kind of, okay, I'm going to get shit, like, pardon my French, but we're going to just get stuff done, right? She's going to organize the house. She's going to get her office or whatever in order, but she's not necessarily best suited at that time to make a really big decision, let's say, because her testosterone is a little bit lower. And this is not sexist. It's just kind of what's happening hormonally. So I think as a woman, if you can get to, and every cycle is different. So that's not to say every woman is like this on day 21. Every woman is like this on day 20. There's certainly variability there. But if a woman can kind of get to know the ebbs and flows of her own cycle, she'll be able to schedule podcasts on her cycle. She'll be able to ask for a raise, when she has better access to more vocabulary. When we see estrogen high, there's receptors all over the brain for both testosterone and estrogen. But when we see estrogen surging, we will see her use more vocabulary, have more ability to express herself more succinctly. She can, like I was saying, presentations and podcasts and asking for raises and reorganizing things and getting things organized on the back end. All those things sort of can pan out over 28 or 29, depending on the length of her cycle days. So I think my book goes into a lot of detail that I'm sort of skimming over here, but I would encourage anyone who wants to live in harmony with her cycle to pick up the book and read through it and see if there's a way that she can kind of get to know herself a little bit better.
So here's a different question. I'm going to take a different angle on this.
Sure.
What do you tell people like myself, right? Blair and I are the founders around here, but like I told you the other day, we built up our entire leadership team are female.
Yeah.
All of our directors are female. Mm-hmm. Almost all of our staff are female. What do we need to take into account? What do we need to know, and what are the do's and don'ts?
Well, I think that
being most effective in the workplace with our team.
I think the first step is having the women on your leadership team understand themselves. So as I said, not all cycles are different, and cycles change over the course of a woman's life, right? So her cycle in her 20s and her 30s is going to start changing in her 40s and in her 50s. So if the female herself can learn about her own cycle, then she can begin to advocate for herself, and she can start playing around with her own schedule. And this is not to say that, if she's like, hey, listen, I'm not taking that meeting because I'm not in week 2. Like, that's not what we're saying here. It's like, if you can optimize, if there's a way for you to move things around on your calendar, awesome. And if not, then understanding how you need to support yourself, whether it's chemically, whether it's nutritionally, whether it's exercise-wise, supplement-wise, stress management-wise, there's things that you can do. Like, it's not always possible for me. I have a podcast recording every single week. So it's not possible for me to say, hey guys, sorry, like I'm in bleed week this week. Like, I'm not talking to anybody. Like, I'm not going to do that. But there are practices that I have that change over the weeks, I should say, to support my cycle. So in terms of leadership, first, I would say get every woman having a really good understanding of her own cycle. 2-3 months is kind of enough time for her to accrue enough data to start to suss out some patterns. And then maybe there can be a meeting about it. I think that would be so awesome if there could be a communal meeting. If you have a leadership team of men and women, and you can say, hey, and if you have a lot of women working together, there's a lot of science that actually suggests, now there's still some debate around it, but it's often the case that women that are working in close proximity with each other often will cycle sync with each other, meaning that they are usually similar to, usually in the same phase of their menstrual cycle when they're often working together. So you may find if there's conversation in your company around where people are, where women are in their menstrual cycle, you may actually be surprised to find that a lot of them are actually like syncing, they've kind of synced up with each other. And that might be a fun opportunity for you to say, okay, so can we have this open house here, or we can have this marketing meeting here, or whatever. And then you can kind of look at it as you can look at planning out your content, you can look at your marketing, all of that based on your leadership's cycles, which would be like really I think
there's a lot of walls for those conversations to start happening, right? That are up for you. But I agree, like as employers, especially post COVID and like what happened during COVID,
sure,
we're being forced to kind of adapt and look at alternative working styles, right? So there's no reason why conversations like this can't happen.
Well, if you speak to my partner, Giovanni, who you've met, he's the first person to say that he knows more about menstruation than any man that he knows.
I don't think anybody expected my first podcast episode to have so much cycle talk.
All about menstruation. But I feel like that's such a superpower for him, right? Because he also knows, and I know myself enough now to know when I need a little bit more emotional support. And he also can kind of pick up on those signals as well. So I think that there's a beautiful dance that he and I have in our personal relationship, but we also work together as well, right? So he will know, hey, you know what? I'll just take this call. Like, I know you don't want to people right now. Like, I know you're hating everybody right now, so I'll just take the call.
My wife's going to watch this and say, I want you watching Stephanie's podcast.
Taylor, this is a really good strategy. But there's some times in the month where you're so much more extroverted. Like there's times where I feel I love people. I want everyone over. I'm going to entertain. And then there's parts of my cycle where I'm more introverted. I just need kind of recovery and recharge time. And those are the times where he takes the calls or he does the meeting instead of me. So something to think about. And I think, you're talking about this sort of post-COVID world, and I think it would be so it would be forward thinking of you and the company to be considering the different biological needs, let's say, of your leadership team. That would be beyond awesome.
That's great. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay, I got 3 quick final questions just to wrap up for you. So your podcast, you've had some really incredible guests. Give me your top 2 favorite guests.
Top 2 favorites. All right.
Not that you didn't love them all, but
I mean, favorites. We all have them. Same with patients. I would say, I think Dominic D'Agostino was a highlight for me because he was sort of my hero from afar. I had followed him for years, talking about the ketogenic diet. I remember him talking about fasting for 7 days and then going out. He lives on a farm, and then he went and did like a 700-pound deadlift or something at the end of the 5 days. And I was like, man, I just want to do half of what you're doing.
Some people are intense.
Yeah, he's so intense. He's so awesome. And then him and his wife have become friends with time. So it's just been lovely. So Dominic D'Agostino for sure. Let me think. Gosh, there's so many amazing people I've spoken to. I would say, can I give you 3?
Yeah, absolutely.
Dr. Shefali Tsabari, who is the author of many New York Times bestselling books, The Conscious Parent, The Awakened Family. She wrote a book on the radical awakening, which was talking about all of the female archetypes, the martyr and the princess and the queen and all of these sort of archetypes that females take on. That was maybe one of my favorite conversations that I had last year. 1, 2, and then Dr. Robert Lustig was another. So he's a pediatric endocrinologist, retired. He wrote a book called Metabolical, which is a portmanteau of metabolism and diabolical. So Metabolical, brilliant name. I think I had 80 to 90 pages of notes. It was basically an expose of sort of big food and big drugs, big pharma, if you will, and how they are often, conspiring in. And he's, as a someone who was working with children, when he said he first started, 20, 30 years ago, there was no childhood obesity. And then over his tenure, before he retired, everyone was obese. We had everyone had diabetes, all of these different diseases that we typically see in later adulthood, 50, we see type 2 diabetes, we see all of these different metabolic adaptations. He was now seeing in 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, and 10-year-olds. So it was a fabulous conversation. And he just gave 0 Fs, didn't care. He just laid it all out in the book, laid it all out on the podcast. It was a great conversation.
That's great. And last 2 questions.
Yeah.
Your favorite hood in Toronto?
Favorite hood in Toronto? I'm going to go with Lawrence Park, which is my hood.
Nice. And your top 3 favorite restaurants? Don't make me laugh.
Don't make me laugh. Oh my gosh, so much pressure. I think so. Tabbouleh and any Lebanese restaurant, but Tabbouleh is particularly good.
I swear it's been 5 years since I've ordered or gone to Tabbouleh, and I loved it. I used to hit it all the time.
They have the best. Their rice is perfect. Their hummus is perfect. I think it's Stock. Is it Stock? TC. They're on. What are they? They are, oh my goodness. They're on Avenue. No, they're on Yonge Street, just north of Eglinton.
Okay. What is it?
It's like Canadiana, Americana. It's just great food, but they're a branch of an Italian restaurant that I'm blanking on. Adelaide Street in a bank. Like the Adelaide Street Bank. What is the name of that restaurant? They have a couple of different spots. Like there's one in Summerhill. Oh my goodness, what is the name of that Italian restaurant?
Are you talking about Toronto?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's on Adelaide Street.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I can't remember the name. We'll put it in the show notes because I'll look it up when we're done. But I can't remember They're a branch of Stock comes from this same parent company. So that's Stock, I said, Tabbouleh, and STK. Which I knew was going to make you laugh, but I do love STK.
In which I do love eating at STK, but
Yes.
I've had a recent experience, but
Yeah.
it's all good. I'll definitely go back.
Yeah. I'll say for all of these restaurants, I'm always eating at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. It's always the senior special.
Are you strict fasting?
No, I find that when I eat later in the day, it affects my sleep.
Yeah, okay.
So I have, trackers that I wear overnight, and whenever I have food late, 2 to 3 hours, if I don't stop eating, let's say 2 to 3 hours before I go to bed, my sleep, I get hot, or I wake up, or I don't have enough deep sleep, or my HRV, all these different factors of my sleep are sort of thrown off. So I stop eating about 2 to 3 hours before. So for me, that means about 5 or 6 o'clock because I go to bed at 9.
I'm barely 9. I put the kids down at 7:30,
Okay.
and if I make it out of their room and not fall asleep with them,
Yeah.
then it's 8:39. So
Yeah.
I feel you there.
Yeah.
Where can people reach you now?
So you can listen to the podcast. That's a free resource. It's called Better with Dr. Stephanie. Every week we're, on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube now. So that's a good free resource to kind of get to know me and get to know the content that we put out. The book is called The Betty Body. You can buy that on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. Those are the 2 best places. And then I'm also pretty active. I try to be, I at least try to post a couple times a week on Instagram. So it's Dr. Stephanie Estima on Instagram.
What about the Estima Diet?
So you can go to drstephanieestima.com
Okay,
as
it's all
well.
there.
Yeah.
That's great. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. I reached out to you. We haven't talked in how many years?
Yeah.
Not for any reason, just life.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think you got back to me within minutes and said, sure, can't wait. Let's do it. So
Yeah, I
really
think you just
appreciate it.
always pick it up, right? You just pick it up where you left off with
Absolutely.
good people. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.